What's up guys, MizzoFrizzo from Pitchfork Academy here, and in this Unreal Engine 5 tutorial I'm going to add upon my previous video on how to create a very basic twin stick shooter setup by showing you how to set this up to work with a gamepad so that I can run around with the gamepad and use the right stick to look in any direction that I like. And guys, if this tutorial turns out to be of any use or value to you whatsoever, you can support what we do here at Pitchfork Academy by wishlisting our new game coming out April 16th called Skyblocker. We're very excited for this one. It's just going to be $10 and will be a great way to support us here at Pitchfork, because if this game does well, then, well, I'm going to quit my day job and I'm going to be making a lot more tutorials for you guys. But without further ado, let me show you how to do this. Alrighty, so I'm here back in my twin stick shooter project, and the first thing I'm going to do is fix up my input actions to work with my gamepad. So the best way to double check what input mapping context your character is using is if you go to your character's blueprint and you find this add mapping context on begin play and just browse to this input mapping context. You'll find the input mapping context that your character is using. You can open this up, drop down the mappings, and then you can also browse to these input actions to find which folder these are in. These are in third person input and actions, but just in case you've swapped your input mapping context, it's good to browse to these assets and make sure that you're using the right ones. And the first thing we're going to do is create a new input action for our aiming. So I'm going to right click and go to input action. I'll call this IA_aim and open it up. And this can just remain a digital bool, but we are going to add one trigger and we're going to make that trigger hold. And then I'm going to drop down that index and I'm going to change the hold time threshold and the actuation threshold to 0. I can save this and close this. And now I'm going to add it to this input mapping context. So I'll add another mapping. I will select IA aim. I will drop this one down and I'm going to click this little keyboard icon and then right click my mouse and select the right mouse button for one of the inputs. I'll also add another input and I'm just going to find the gamepad left trigger axis. Or digital, depends on your game, how you're setting this up. I'm just going to use this one. And that's all I really need to do for the aim. But the other thing I want to do in the input mapping context while I'm here is repurpose this look input action. Because as you remember, we disconnected IA look in our character's blueprint, but we can use this to rotate our character, and it already comes set up with the right thumbstick 2D axis as an input. So we can use this one, but we do just want to bin this mouse input, because we don't want those fighting with each other, and we are not using the mouse for that. We're using the mouse cursor, but not the actual mouse input axes. So with that scrapped, we can save this and close this and head back to our BP third person character. And very quickly, just before we implement our IA look, I'm going to come down here to the right mouse button stuff here, and I'm just going to find my IA aim. I'm going to drop this down, and I'm going to hold Control and drag this one onto started. I'll drag this one onto cancelled, and I'll also plug in completed. So on started, we'll execute this logic, and we'll execute this logic on cancelled or completed, like so. Nice. Okay, let's have a look at our look mechanic. Now, we're not going to need these nodes here, so we can delete these, and I'm going to make quite a bit more room here because we're going to need quite a bit here. And the first thing I'm going to do here is create a new variable that's basically just going to tell us if we're using a controller. Now, I'm not going to go into sort of more advanced ways of detecting whether the player has started using a controller, because I do believe that would require some C++ But I'm just going to show you a very quick and hacky way to basically make sure that this works in Blueprints, even if you're not detecting whether you're using a keyboard and mouse or a controller. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it using controller question mark. And first thing I'm going to do on look here is check if I'm aiming. So I'll grab my aiming variable, put it on a branch, and that will be my very first check, because if we're not aiming, we don't want to rotate our character. And if you do want to rotate your character all the time, you don't have to have this aiming stuff in here. I might show you at the end very quickly how to just remove it so you've got a sort of more true twin stick shooter. But for my game, I want this aiming mechanic, so I'm going to keep it in there. I'm going to grab using controller as well and another branch. Plug this one into this branch. Whoops. And if this is false, when we go to use our IA look, our right thumbstick, we first want to set this to true, because we are now trying to use our controller. So I'll set that to true, and we can try, I'm not sure if this will work, but we'll try to set show mouse cursor as false as well. And then what we're going to do here is set our rotation of our character. So set actor rotation. I'll put this way out to the right. I will get an R interp to. The current rotation will be just our actor rotation. So we can get actor rotation. And I'm going to split this and split this. Plug all of these in here. And this will also plug into the X and Y of the target. So I'll split that, plug in the X and the Y down here as well. And then the Z, we are going to make a vector from our action values over here. So we can drag off of action value X and make a vector. And we can also plug in the Y. And then I am going to make a rotator from X. So this basically makes a rotator from the X vector of this vector. And we can split this because we only need the yaw. And it depends how your character is rotated, but I happen to know that Manny is rotated by 90 degrees and that we will actually need to add 90 to this and plug it into the target Z. And then the delta time, we can get well delta seconds. And the interp speed, I'm going to set to 7.5. This will be how quickly he sort of rotates towards where you're pushing the stick. Your character may be rotated differently. So if you notice that your rotation is offset by 90 degrees or maybe, more, you can play with this and you may not even need it. You may just be able to plug that straight in there. But I happen to know that Manny needs this 90-degree rotation like so. Now, this will basically be working, but we don't want our look to fight with the look that's happening on tick here when we're aiming. So we can make some changes here so that when we're using controller, this will not fire. And the first thing we can do to improve this is I put an extra branch here at the start, but we don't actually need that. We can use the one branch and we can use an AND Boolean. So I will get an AND Boolean. We can plug both of these into here, our aiming and our trace for the mouse cursor. And then we can add another pin here and we can grab our using controller and a not Boolean. So only if our trace hits something, if we're aiming and we're not using controller, then this will fire. So if we're using our controller, this will not fire. But we also need to, sorry, there's one other thing here. I didn't plug this false in. So if we're not using controller, we set using controller to true, hide the mouse cursor, and then we want to set actor rotation after that one as well. Otherwise, it will wait until the next tick. The first tick will set this to true, and then on the next tick it will start setting it. But we can just plug this straight in here, and we can even put a reroute node here like this and make this a little bit neater. Nice. But we also want to set that using controller to false when we use our mouse. And there's a pretty easy way to do that. So down at the bottom here, I am going to get mouse XY 2D axis mouse events. Now this will pretty much always fire. I thought this would only fire if I actually have an axis value on the mouse, but this is going to always pull the axis value of the mouse. So what we can actually do is just check if this axis value is not equal to 0. We can just leave this all as 0, and an AND boolean, and using the controller, if that's the case. So if use controller is set to true, this will fire, and we will set it to false, and we will also just grab this show mouse cursor right here, duplicate it down here, and set show mouse cursor to true. I'm pretty sure that's everything. We can give this a test now. So I've got my controller plugged in. I can hit play, and if I click into the viewport, I've got my normal setup that we played with last time. But this is working as an enhanced input action, because remember we put aim on an input action, so that is working. And if I grab the controller, I can run around and I can press aim with the left trigger, and then my character will face wherever I am aiming, and that's not fighting the mouse at all. I see that there's some weird issues with the mouse there. Inputting with the mouse is not setting show mouse cursor correctly. So there may be something else we can do here. I suppose we don't have an input action for the mouse, so we might need a separate input action for the mouse instead of using that mouse XY 2D axis. So I have an idea here. I'm not sure if it's going to make much of a difference, but let's give it a go. Let's take IA look and just duplicate it, and we'll just call it IA mouse. Open this up and make sure this is axis 2D vector. And we shouldn't need to swizzle anything or do anything, because we're not actually using the input actions. We're just detecting if it's used at all. So we can save that and close that and open up the IMC default. We can add a new input action here. We'll add IA mouse, and then we will just set this to mouse XY 2D axis like so. Save that, close that, and then instead of using this mouse XY 2D axis, let's look for our IA mouse. And now when that's triggered, I don't know if we'll be able to check if that's not equal to 0. What happens if we split this action value? We'll get X and Y. Okay. Yeah, so we'll leave that combined and we'll just plug it into the not equal. That should be fine. And now let's see if that works. So we've got our regular inputs like so. We've got the mouse cursor. If I use the controller and I aim and use that, it does not hide the mouse cursor, which is a little bit annoying. We are setting that to false. And then once I move the mouse, it makes it disappear. That's really strange. Yeah, so it's not the most perfect setup. This show mouse cursor is not. We might even just try get player controller here and see if that I'm pretty sure it won't make a difference because we're already setting the that reference straight from player controller up here. But let's give it a go anyway. Can't hurt to try. Got the normal setup, and then with the controller, nope. When I press that, it's saying click for mouse up the top left again. So it's yeah, it's being a bit funny about the mouse cursor. That's okay. It's still working. You just need to figure out how to hide the mouse cursor, which, as I said, if you're detecting input from a controller, sometimes it can require some C++. It's actually pretty tricky stuff to you know, make sure your game works with keyboard and mouse and controller seamlessly. It's a bit more involved, but this is working as intended. And now I'll just show you how to modify this in case you don't want to have an aiming mechanic. So I will just disconnect these IA aim execution pins like so, and instead of having any checks on aiming with look here on the controller, I will remove that branch, and I will also remove aiming from this AND boolean and right click this pin and remove the pin, and that should be all we need to do. Now it's always going to orient rotation to movement. So that's the other thing. The main thing is that orient rotation to movement is switched off. So we need to search for orient and uncheck orient rotation to movement, because otherwise that will fight with where you're trying to make your character look. And now I can run around, and whichever direction I'm moving, he will always face the mouse cursor. And if I do the same with controller, that's working perfectly. They're pointing in whichever direction I move the right thumbstick. And that's all we set out to do, guys. If this tutorial has been of any use or value to you whatsoever, please hit like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.